Profound Achievement Chinese Martial Science podcast, where we cut through all the fantasy of traditional Chinese martial arts. I'm your host, Sifu Troy Dunwood. I run the Profound Achievement Martial Science School here in Citrus Heights, California. And this podcast is for all martial artists, regardless of style, who want to understand the real science, history, and application of traditional Chinese Kung Fu. Today we're talking about respecting the tradition of Chinese Kung Fu and what that really means, what people get wrong, and why it matters. Too many people either blindly follow tradition without understanding it, or they throw it out completely in favor of the latest trend. Both mindsets are a fatal mistake. So let's break this thing down. Tradition versus blind tradition. Respecting tradition doesn't just mean memorizing your training forms, bowing to pictures or altars, and repeating phrases in Cantonese or Mandarin. That's surface level material. Real respect means understanding why these traditions exist, what they teach, and how they connect to the bigger picture of martial arts. Preserving tradition means keeping it real, teaching what works, and passing it on properly. Now, why does this matter? People say traditional martial arts are outdated. They are simply wrong. The problem isn't the art, it's how people train it. Chinese Kung Fu, when taught and practiced correctly, is just as effective today as it was centuries ago. But that requires real training, real pressure testing, and real understanding of what makes it work. Respecting tradition means taking responsibility to train properly, teach honestly, and never forget the deeper values behind the art. If you're practicing Kung Fu or any martial art, take a step back and ask yourself, are you truly respecting the tradition, or are you just going through the motions? This podcast is about keeping it real. No myths, no fluff. Just the truth about Chinese martial science. Respecting the tradition has to do with many years that have come before us, especially we as non-Asians and Asians alike. Most of us tend to the traditional Chinese Kung Fu schools as non-Asians, coming into a culture that we are not aware of. The first part, to me, in understanding the tradition, is understanding the culture. I mean, how can you respect the tradition if you know nothing about the culture? You have to equip yourself with a knowledge and understanding of the culture in which you are stepping into. Now, as for myself, I promote 3 traditional styles here in the Sacramento Valley. One of Hong Sing Chole Fat, which I have learned from my Sifu, the present heir of the Lao Bun lineage that's been around in San Francisco since the late 1920s. Also, I practiced the Pek Hua Mun that I originally learned in San Francisco from my teacher, Yun Chen, who I now have been going back to Hong Kong, learning from my Sifu, Li Chan Sam, getting corrections and things of that nature, as well as learning the La Ka Pa Fa from Sifu Li as well in Hong Kong. each style has its own culture, customs, and traditions. But we, stepping into a traditional Kung Fu school, respecting the tradition has to do with first understanding the why. Why was it a need for the Kung Fu system to come into existence in the first place? With many Southern styles, it was merely about survival. Some survival in their community. You hear of oftentimes the village style this or the village style that. I mean, simple farming tools that were later translated into weapons for self-defense to protect their families, livestock, what have you. So when it comes to really respecting the tradition, I would say, first coming out, always have respect for the Sifu. The Sifu is like your martial father. You always want to respect Sifu. You always want to respect the past patriarchs. I mean, we're not talking about no godlike reverence. What we're saying is respecting the Sifu and the elders for the road that they have already traveled and are passing on to the newer generations. And in that same token, always respect your school. I mean, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to wear your club t-shirt. It represents your teacher, it represents your school, it represents your lineage. You know, you don't want to be like bringing a negative light to your club. You know, advertising the school name and this kind of thing. So, you know, representing the school by the uniform, traditional t-shirt, pants, and a belt. Respecting the tradition is also about coming to practice on time with a clean uniform, a clean shirt, clean pants. You know, that's all a part of the deal. Respecting your classmates, you know, respecting people in general. I mean, there's many different traditions that each style lay claim to. And I mean, it's not for me to say what has value and what not. If you practice, for example, the Choleput style, and the Choleput style has practiced these particular traditional aspects, respect it. Respect it. It's not a bad thing. And tradition is not so outdated. So in the final analysis, I would say ultimately respecting tradition is in the tradition in which you are taught. In my case, I say I learn, practice, and teach in the tradition in which it was given to me. Now, speaking quite frankly, I don't know what happened in the 1800s. I wasn't there. But I do know how it was when I first started. So I like to tend to tell people, you respect the tradition in the tradition that you were taught. So understanding the whys behind it, not just the top of the surface. And if you have to, ask the question. Ask your teacher the question. Why is it that you bow to the altar? Why is it that you light incense at various times? Why is it that you pay homage to certain patriarchs? You have to understand the why behind all of this. Otherwise, how can you really respect the tradition if you don't know anything about it? And I guess that's the main thing of what I'm saying. A lot of people take traditional Chinese martial arts. Nowadays, they intermix it with modern to come up with this MMA-like material, In my opinion, I think all traditional Chinese martial arts are self-sufficient. I think they have what they need already. But far too many people are stuck on the top of the surface. When we're in such a rush to get from point A to point B, we miss everything in the middle. And the very thing that you're looking for can be overlooked because you're trying so quickly to get to the finish line without understanding. And unfortunately, that's the state of a lot of people at this point in time. Traditional Chinese martial arts has been around for centuries, and there's a reason why it's lasted so long. Because it does work, and it does have relevance in these so-called modern times. The problem is a lot of people are not learning from people who are qualified to pass on the traditional knowledge. Most people out here today, in my opinion, are teaching top of the surface material. I always tell my students, Hong Sing Cholefa, a traditional Southern Chinese martial arts style, going back to our patriarch, Professor Lao Bun, to his successor, my grandmaster, Professor Zhu Liang, to my Sifu, Sifu Dino Salvatierra. Traditionally, for example, the Hong Sing horse is taught to everyone that walks through the door. Now we marvel at the older generation how fabulous their horse look, you know, how efficiently they move. And we do all this marvel and do all this marvel. But in actuality, we can't relate. We can't relate. You know why we can't relate? Because we didn't do the work. If I never did the work, Hong Sing Cholepa, horse practice, minimum in the old days, I'm told like 6 months. Take it now, 3 months. You can't have a conversation with your sifu about the horse if you never endured it. That's a traditional aspect of traditional Chinese martial arts. Building from the ground up. Building your foundation, building your base. You know? So that's one of those things that in a real traditional Kung Fu school, you cannot get around. Nowadays, it's a whole different story. Because the traditional methods are not being taught. Because unfortunately, a lot of Chinese martial arts, like a lot of martial arts in general, have turned commercial. It's all about the quantity as opposed to the quality. You want to be able to stand your ground with a solid horse. You have to endure horse training. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to do it. I can go and have a conversation with my sifu about horse training if I'd never done it. For that matter, classmates alike, we can't have a conversation about the horse if you never practice it or if I never practice, you know. But unfortunately, that's the state in which we are in now. But fortunately, there are a few that still adhere to the traditional standard. And those that are promoting the traditional standard are the reason why traditional Kung Fu is surviving to this day. So to make a long story short with this, understand that traditional Chinese Kung Fu has value. And it is what you make it. I hope you all have a very fruitful journey in your martial art learning. And I thank you for tuning in to this, our first podcast, of which many more are to come. Be talking about different topics. We will be having guests on. We will be highlighting martial art techniques and the like. If you like this, please give us a like and subscribe. I thank you in advance.